PickFu is a self-service consumer research platform that anyone can use to get fast, reliable feedback from real people. You don't need to be a market research expert or hire one to use PickFu. All you need to do is create a poll, choose your target audience, and in minutes, you're going to start getting results. Real written responses from your target audience. You can ask for feedback on just about anything related to your business, marketing material, product designs, product packaging, almost anything. The respondents submit written comments with every PickFu poll. And now you can use the coupon code NOT101, that's NOT101, for a free 15-person poll at pickfu.com, pickfu.com.
Welcome to Business Law 101, a podcast that explores the uncommon side of business, goes beyond the conventional teachings, delves into the practical, real-world strategies and insights from successful founders, entrepreneurs, industry experts that understand what drives growth and how to achieve success in an ever-changing business landscape. So join us, and let's go beyond the basics. Hi, Becca. How are you?
I'm good. Nice to be on your podcast. I'm excited for this interview.
Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. All right, so please introduce yourself and give us a quick overview of your book.
Yes, I'd love to. All right, so I'm Becca Powers. I am author of Harness Your Inner CEO. And that opening right there, people are like, well, what's inside the book? And I'll tell you. So the book title came from one of my most dramatic and powerless moments. I fell to the bathroom floor one night after work. It was my fourth bad day in a row. I was working 12-hour days. I'm a corporate sales leader, and I had 4 kids in middle school at home. I walked through the door exhausted, and they're running up to me happy, like, hey, Mom, like, we had a really good day at school. We want to tell you about it. And I had no presence. I was running on empty, and I told them, Mom needs 5 minutes. And I saw them shift. I saw them go from happy to sad, and my mom heart broke. And so I had to carry that with me the whole rest of the evening. I tried to recollect myself to be present for them and stuff like that. But when I got to that end of the day and I was getting ready for bed, I collapsed to the floor in complete exhaustion. I no longer was able to power through my day or to hype myself up. You know, I'm in sales. I'm able to be like, tomorrow's going to be a good day. You know, I wasn't able to do that. I had nothing left. And when I fell to the bathroom floor, I started to cry and curled into a ball because I had nowhere to go but up. That's what I say. I had to like call out to universe, God, hey, I need some help. Like I can't do this the same way tomorrow. And I had no idea how I was going to do tomorrow. But in that moment, I say I got my instant miracle. And I remembered a conversation I had had like 3 years earlier where a former VP of sales had told me, Becca, you're the CEO of your life. And so it was in that moment that I thought, hey, if I was able to harness my inner CEO, then maybe I wouldn't feel so powerless on the bathroom floor. So it was that's where the book came from. And what it's about is about rising back into your power, reclaiming your life, taking charge, and reestablishing your priorities and your boundaries so that you can love your life, both at work and at home.
That's fascinating. So did you just jump into your current role, or did you have to sort of figure out where you were and sort of rebuild your life around that new concept, sort of like reawakening of your new career and life?
It was a reawakening, and I think it's like a both and. I was in that role for 3 years, and it wasn't a fit. And I think like as we pursue our careers when they're not pure callings, right? We can find ourselves in a position where we stay because the paycheck's attached to it. We might be primary providers. And I was in a very similar situation like that, where there was a lot of emotion tied into my role. I also was a sales leader. I had a team. I loved the company and the motto and things like that. So there was a lot of, I always say leaders are very service-based for the most part and very impact-based. And so I found myself almost self-sacrificing to serve what I thought was the greater good or to do the right thing. And what I didn't realize is that in prioritizing everything else, I wasn't even on the priority list, which is how I got there. And then to, answer your question more directly too, is once I got into that next day, I had to just kind of like, I had a situation, and I can tell you the story after, but I had to put in a boundary right away that I didn't even know how to set boundaries. I just knew that if I said yes to this thing that I was being asked to do, that I would probably end up on the bathroom floor again because I would overextend myself. So I ended up realizing pretty quickly that that role wasn't going to be a fit anymore. So I ended up within about 90 days to 120 days shifting roles and companies.
Yeah, I feel that because it's something that some companies just take so much, and certain roles take so much, and you do need, certainly when you find yourself in that position where you've hit the wall, you need to refocus and reset your life. And it's interesting you say this. So you left the employer and you went and wrote your book, or did you go somewhere else and work and then realize, you know what, I'd rather write a book about this?
So it's a little bit of an interesting story. So I'm in tech sales. I actually still work full time. I work for Cisco. And what I love so much about my story, what I want to encourage the listeners to kind of absorb here is that you can have it all. And it just comes down to choices. Like, some people want a whole buffet. Well, you might not be able to have a buffet, but you can certainly have a Thanksgiving plate if you want it. And what I mean by that is, once I knew that I still wanted to be in sales, but I didn't know if I wanted to lead. I needed to repair myself. So I went back to an independent contributor role, and I've been an independent contributor since that moment, and it's going on 7 years now. So probably going back into sales leadership soon, but I really just wanted the freedom of being myself and still making the money that I needed to make to provide, but relearning myself. And like you said, reawakening, that rediscovering. And in that rediscovering process, I ended up kind of landing my dream role at Cisco. And I was so happy that there was just more time and space. I don't know how else to put it. Like I was like, as part of my passions, I love to write. I'm a geek. I like to read. I love to write. And I just started writing because I like to write. And next thing that you knew, I signed up for a writer's group, and they're like, oh, you're going to write a book in 30 days. I was like, we'll see what happens. And I had a rough draft in about 30, 45 days.
That's great. I find in a collaborative environment, we can do so much. It's in our own little bubble, we tend to just sort of simmer there. But in a collaborative, I'm always amazed when I hear people write things or do things in collaborative groups. I'm like, yes, that's so true. It's like that energy just flows. So now, what made you decide to write about this subject? Was it your experience, or was it more like, this is what I feel really strongly and passionate about, so let me share it with my audience?
I would say, starting with my own experience, but both. I realized that I wasn't alone when I realized that I basically fell to the floor in extreme burnout. And I realized that I wasn't alone. And I also knew that I healed myself. It was a 2-year journey. It didn't happen overnight. I didn't start writing the book till 2 years later, when I had enough reflection and enough, steps that I could share with somebody else how to do the same. But once I got in a place of putting the outline together, I was like, actually, I do have steps. There was a progressive way that I did this that I could share with someone else. So then it really turned in from, hey, here's an experience. Like I started off kind of memoir-y, and then it turned into like a true blown, like personal growth book for someone else.
Yeah, I can see that. And having skimmed through it a little bit, I want to ask you a question about what is the AWTAF method?
So that's a good one. It's one of my favorites because I feel like all change starts with awareness, and I call it admit when things are effed. Because so many times, especially in like modern day society, like we've already built the picture, like there's kids, there's jobs, there's money, there's bills, there's soccer practice, there's all these things. You don't have time to stop and think about yourself. Like you're just on the go. And I was in a role, if I'm being completely honest with myself, I was in a role that I knew wasn't a fit 6 months into the role. Here I am 3 years later, still in that freaking role. And it took me like coming to terms that this situation's just messed up, and I need to admit it. And the reason that I threw the F-bomb at the end of it too is because I'm a big like Tony Robbins fan, and he does drop the F-bomb now and then, but there's a psychological effect that happens. It interrupts your nervous system and grabs your attention. And so that's why I wrote it like that too, so that the reader would actually stop and be like, oh my God, like maybe I do need to admit that things aren't going well right now.
That's brilliant. And Anthony Robbins is Awaken the Giant. That's what started a lot of my career moves. So I love him.
Yes.
So when you were writing this book, and obviously when you start writing a book, and I haven't written a book yet myself, so I'm only going with what people have told me. One of the things is that we have the aha moment why we launched the book. We've explained that. But now it's actually writing the book. So what were some of the roadblocks? Because now you're taking what you've experienced over a couple of years or months and are trying now to put it into a format that people can read. So what were some of the roadblocks you hit trying to do that?
I think for me, the first one kind of goes back to a question you had a couple back, which was, am I doing this full time? Am I still working? What's going on? One of the biggest challenges I had when I was through the first draft part, which there was so much more after that, was time, because I work full time. I have kids. Like, I really found it challenging to carve out the time. Then it became like a blanket, like something that I truly enjoyed. I started waking up at 5:30 in the morning. Fast forward, I still do that. Like that's when I write now. But it was finding a spot for it in my life was the first challenge. And then the other challenge was just my ego. Like once it got into like an editor's hand, you get all the red lines back, and I'm, recovering perfectionist, I like to say. And that was like a blow to me. I was like, oh my gosh. I thought I was a good writer, but I might not be.
That must be like really harsh. I've only, some other of the guest authors, they said the same thing, where they felt, really nervous handing it over to somebody else, their manuscript or their book. And, you don't think about it because you're like, oh, it's, good enough. When you're in the business world, it's like perfection is the enemy, right? You want it good enough to launch it. But it seems in books, it's the opposite. You want it to be almost perfection. So that's really interesting.
Yeah.
So how did you research your book? Because obviously it comes from your personal experience, but as well, you're now trying to bring in some science behind it to make sure that it's just not your story, but a story that people can sort of relate to and also build off of. So how did you do some of your research?
Yeah, there's a whole bunch that I did. I did interview a bunch of women, and not that it's a book just for women, but that's my like core audience. So I interviewed a bunch of women that had gone through similar things and started seeing the pattern. I'm a pattern junkie. Like I love seeing patterns and things. So then I started seeing the patterns in all the interviews. I started being able to relate it back to me. I'm also a Kundalini yoga teacher, so I know a lot about the nervous system, breath, resetting. And that's how I was able to do a lot of my healing, was to go into my own toolbox. But then I did also get certified as a life coach. I got certified in trauma awareness. I got certified in shadow beliefs, because I did want to be able to bring a fully comprehensive, here's how to get unstuck and here's how to get back into your personal power formula for the readers.
That's really interesting. I recently had a guest who also specializes in resetting your nervous system, but I've never heard of the shadow part. Could you elaborate on that?
Sure. So shadow beliefs are really our limiting beliefs. And what's really interesting when it comes to burnout, I because I have this 20-year corporate background, I ended up creating my own framework for burnout. I call it the 5 stages of burnout. But it comes back to the shadow, because the shadow are our core wounds. Like, I'm not good enough. I'm not lovable. I'm not wanted. And when we get into our adult years, you know, that our childhood years are far behind us, but those we call them shadow beliefs are still in us. And especially at work, they get triggered. And when they're triggered, I call them the uns, but when we feel unwanted, unloved, like things like that, it triggers us feeling undervalued, underappreciated, underrecognized. And those are all those shadowy qualities that really lead us into like a downward spiral.
That's super interesting. So I've never heard of it. I understand sort of the core memories and the effects it has, but that's really interesting. So, you know, and mental well-being is super important. And certainly for entrepreneurs and startups, it's really be able to understand that, because it's so easy to fall into a pit of despair sometimes. So that's great.
And when you can, like, so this is how they're all interconnected. Is, let's just say at work, I'm feeling, I don't know, unwanted, just no one's paying enough attention to me or whatever. But that's what I'm internalizing. I'm feeling unwanted. And then I start feeling, oh, are they undervaluing me? They are undervaluing me. I'm working so hard. And then I start looking at my behavior. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm overworking, I'm overcommitting. And then that whole kind of cycle is together where, you know, I'm feeling unseen, unheard. I'm overworking, overcommitting, taking on more projects because I want to give value. But hey, at the end of the day, I'm feeling undervalued. And that's when people start questioning their belonging to an organization, or even, I mean, it could be relevant to a family too.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. So yeah, I learn something every time I interview somebody. So I love that.
Thanks.
So what is one thing you want your readers, if they read the book, what is one thing you really want them to take away from your book?
That they are worthy of living their best life. Like I talk, and that's such a cliche saying these days, but the worthy piece is really important to me, because when we don't feel we're worthy, we don't prioritize our well-being, is what it comes down to. And when we feel worthy, we are willing to prioritize our well-being first. We're willing to put in a boundary. We're willing to say yes to ourselves and no to other people. And that's always my message. I'm like, you are worthy of your well-being, period. No one deserves to take that from you. And it's ultimately our responsibility at the end of the day if we do let someone else or an organization take that from us.
That's a great point. I love it. Since the launch of your book, what has been some of the most successful ways you've been able to grow your community and grow your readership?
I feel that showing up, it was one of the hardest things. Like we talked about the hard part of writing. I think the harder part for a writer is becoming visible, because you have to be visible on social media. You have to, that's how people find you. And even if you're not that big of a platform yet, you just start growing every time you show up. And it took a while for me to find my voice. Like I felt more comfortable writing than I did speaking, 100%. And it's weird because I feel comfortable speaking to larger audiences. I'm a keynote speaker, but you've hit me one-on-one with the camera and I wanted to barf. So I think that was one of the hardest things that I had to overcome, but also the most rewarding, when I could find a way to authentically connect with my people. My readership grew because people do what they do. Hey, did you see this? I want to share this. And that's kind of how it happened.
Have you found it that these interviews, these podcasts, and let's say video casts have been the most successful word of mouth to grow your readership?
Podcasting for sure. For sure. I found I did a pretty good podcast tour, I say, during my launch, and I saw orders almost after every interview. I think that if I was to relaunch again, I would probably put more time into podcasting than I did. I wrote some articles and did some other style type of interviews, but I think podcasting probably had the most results.
That's really interesting. So it's good to hear as a podcaster.
I know, right?
Yeah. And I tell people from my experience, when I started a podcast, I was amazed how much word of mouth carries. So that's super interesting. Now, switching it up a little bit, if you can go and leave yourself, your past self, so before you were on the bathroom floor, a message, what would it be?
I'd be like, girl, quit that job. No, I'm just kidding.
I love it.
But it's something serious to that. I always say, in hindsight, we knew the answer. We knew. Like, I knew. Most people have been like, before I dated that person, I knew something in my gut feeling. Or before I took that job, something told me. And, we ignore those things.
Yeah, that's so true. We should listen to our gut. I always tell that to people. I mentor people, and I always tell them, listen to your gut, because that's probably the best you can ever do. And here's a fun question I like to ask everybody who's an author, certainly a business author. If you can write a biography of any business person or famous person, let's say like a Warren Buffett, who would it be and why?
I'm going back to Tony Robbins. I guess that's who's in my space right now. But
I would do it too. I 100% agree.
Yeah, I really love his work, and I have been, as I mentioned the shadow, I just want to give the audience a little color. So shadow work is really everything that's on that more limiting belief side. So that's trauma work, and all of those things, burnout, trauma, are really popular right now. The thing that I don't like about the popularity is that people are getting stuck in their limited beliefs, their shadow work, and their burnout because there's not a way out. And what I love about Tony Robbins and his work is that you break through your barriers, you let go of your limitations, but you spend all this time programming yourself to, for your potential. And I'm like, whoa, if all of us were in our potential, this would be a much better world. So anyway, that's my why behind why I picked Tony Robbins right now.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And that's a great point you brought up, because we do tend to wallow in our own little bubble. If we want to, our own silos, if it's so easy to fall into, and then woe me.
Yes.
And then why you're not happy, and you're looking at it, but instead of saying, okay, well, now I know why, now I need to find the door to leave. And I don't know if it's a generational thing, but I've seen that it's a conversation that comes up, like what happens when you start spinning your wheels in the mud. So that's a great point. I love it. And it's so true. Tony Robbins is not the type of person I could see wallow too long. So
yeah, it's and let's get out of that.
That's it. Yeah. You had 5 minutes. Let's move along now.
Yes.
So aside from your book, what is one business book that you read in your career that's helped you professionally?
My favorite leadership book is It's Not About the Coffee by Howard Bear. It was probably written around 2012-ish, I'm thinking. But he's the former vice president and president of International of Starbucks. And so that's why it's not about the coffee, but you really get a full sense of that it was really about the people. And that's what made the coffee great.
That's great. I love it. How do you stay productive and focused now that you obviously have your day job, you have your family, and you're writing books? Or are you writing another book, by the way?
Yeah, I am writing another book. I'm podcasting. I'm speaking. I think, and this is where I was indicating before, that you can have a very full plate and not be overwhelmed. You just have to choose all the things. So I'm totally in my passions now. I don't do many things that don't fill me up. And if I do, then I always say choice has two paths. They can either help us, our choices either help us or hurt us, or they empower us or disempower us. And we can't say no to everything. We have to participate in life. But I do know now that if I say yes to something that's going to zap my energy, I'm going to put it back in. And because of that, I've gotten really good with boundaries. Like I said, I wake up at 5:30 in the morning, not because I have to, but because I want to. And wanting versus needing is a whole different ball game, because my energy is full and alive, and you can see I'm jazzed up right now. So, but I wake up in the morning, I write, I do a lot of my podcasting outlines, whatever I'm doing in my thought leader world, if I want to call it that. And then I work, and then I spend time with my family. My days are done by 5:30 for the most part, unless there's an opportunity like this to be on an awesome podcast.
Thank you. Yes, I know it's so hard finding time. So I tend to, record in the morning, record at night, whenever it's really hard to find, a fixed schedule for everybody.
Yes.
So my last closing question to you is, how could my listeners come out and connect with you and connect with your book? And we'll be adding this to the show notes as well.
Yeah, that's great. So social media is really super simple. LinkedIn and Instagram are my biggest platforms, but I'm on Facebook too, and they're all at Becca Powers 1313. And my website is beccapowers.com. Super easy. And if you go to the website, there's a free downloadable there that's like your legacy empowerment guide, but it'll help you get your dreams going and start thinking a little bigger.
Perfect. Well, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. It was an absolute pleasure to have you on.
Yeah, it was awesome to be here. Thank you so much.
Business 911 is hosted and written by me, Levi Bousset, and produced and edited by our talented podcast team. To listen to Business 911, you'll find us on all your favorite podcast apps, as well as YouTube. We hope you've enjoyed this interview and it's given you some valuable insights and helped you along your business journey. And if you have any comments or questions, please reach out to us. Thank you for joining us and listening to this episode of Business 911. A pitch deck in 60 seconds. We want to thank our sponsors, Pitch 2.0, a fully automated pitch creation and monitoring system, so you can focus on your product and not on the tech. You'll find them at pitch2.0.com.